This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by Coragen Max insecticide from FMC. Get fast, selective, extended control of grasshoppers, Bertha armyworms, diamondback moth, and cutworms in a convenient, concentrated formulation. Coragen Max insecticide works alongside beneficials for a 1-2 punch that keeps the fight going long after you've left the field.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Tuesday edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. Also, of course, as always, a big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. It is great to have you here from Canada, the U.S., or beyond. Welcome to the RealAg community. Please spread the good word. Tell your friends, your family. The more listens, the better, and keeps this engine cooking, so to speak. So, hey, looking forward to today's show. This is a busy week because, as I mentioned yesterday, I'm in Kansas City all week for the NAMA convention. So a bit of a switch around on the schedule. Lindsay's been doing the Tuesday show. I'm obviously here today. I'll be with you again tomorrow, and then Lindsay will be the host on Thursday and Friday. Still hoping to join Friday's show as maybe a panelist, but we'll have to see how the week does proceed. And, loving the food in Kansas City. I'll tell you what, it is good. I'm going to get to that in a second. But first, I want to tell you about what's on the show here today. So we're going to hear from Jon Driedger of LeftField Commodity Research. We're going to talk about the markets. How do we view this market? We have definitely sloughed off. We're not to the lows of where we were in the spring of 2020, but we are definitely closer to the lows than we are to the highs of 21 and 22. So how do we steer through this? Are we still selling to the rallies, or is there some other strategy that's developed from Jon's perspective? We're also going to have your feedback today a little bit. We got emails coming in. We got people sending their thoughts. I love it. Yes, keep it coming. Yes, I love it. It's great. This is just not me yakking at you. This is also you giving me your perspectives on how you feel about a number of different topics. We're also going to hear today from Ken Forth from Farms to talk about the TFW changes potentially that are coming to Canada. There's been a number of different perspectives that we've had here on the show. We'll continue to get another one here today. OFA was not concerned. We'll see where Farms is. But, hey, the Canadian Meat Council, the meat processors, very concerned. It's starting to look like there's going to be exemptions for primary agriculture, but processors, you're in trouble. Because the changes are going to impact you. It's kind of the tea leaves as we read them here at this point. But we'll see what Ken has to say. And we'll also have time today for the top ag news stories of the day. Now, if you have feedback, we would love to hear from you. As I mentioned, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the different social media platforms. Or you can, call the RealAg feedback line. Why not do that? 855-776-6147. Most of you send emails and contact us via social media. But you know what? If I could have one wish here in this period of the year, because you're going to be sitting in the tractor. You're going to be rolling through the field. You've got hands free, right? You got auto steer. Write some notes down and then call the feedback line. Okay, just don't do it. You don't have to do it off the cuff. You write some notes down. Think about what you're going to say, maybe, if that would help you. And drop us a line. Call the RealAg feedback line and let us know your perspectives. Would love to hear from you directly. 855-776-6147. I mentioned I'm in Kansas City this week, and I am really hoping to go to the Blue Jays game tonight. The Blue Jays are very conveniently in Kansas City this week. A few of you have alleged and made accusations that the only reason I'm in Kansas City this week is to watch the Blue Jays. No, it was a coincidence. I promise you, because I'm actually here for a convention for work. But hoping to go to the game tonight. I've never been to the Royal Stadium. I've heard nothing but good things about it. It's really one of the most underrated stadiums in the league, it is a great spot to go watch a ball game. So I'm hoping to do that tonight. But the one thing I've found is, and I've been here lots of times, the food is tremendous. Whether it's the steaks or it's the barbecue, it's really in my palate zone. It doesn't take much to really make me happy. And when it comes to meat, that puts a smile on my face, indeed. Curious what? Okay, if I said Kansas City is really a great food town, from my perspective, some of you food snobs may disagree with that. What is a city that you love to go to that really has it cooking? They've got food, and you're like when you think of it, that's what you're doing. We are going there to eat, baby. Now, some of you may say Vegas. Some of you may say like a Nashville, which has fantastic restaurants. Some would, honestly, here's one that I would put in your head. I think Saskatoon has a great restaurant scene. Yes, Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. I think they do. Lethbridge, terrible. Everybody just wants to go to a chain. Nobody ever wants to go to an independent restaurant, so to speak. But let me know what you think. What are some of your favorite places to go? And it could be small town, it could be large city. It doesn't matter. Just want your perspective, because you know what? We love around here. We love food. That's right. We love to eat. Our audience is producing it, and we also like to consume it. So send me that feedback. shaney@realagriculture.com. I think I'm putting KC up there pretty high. I am. I'm telling you. Kansas City pretty high. My wife has asked me repeatedly, have you seen Travis or Taylor yet? And no, I'm pretty sure that here at the end of April, Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift they're just not walking the streets. They're not walking the streets. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, we're bringing in Jon Driedger. He's coming in here. He's from LeftField Commodity Research out of Winnipeg, Manitoba. He's going to break down these markets for us right after this. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. It's now time for a product spotlight. We're joined by Jody Griffin, Program Coordinator for the Livestock Price Insurance Program. Why should producers purchase an LPI policy?
Listening to you and Ann over the last couple of weeks on those market reports, because LPI is a forward-looking, market-driven program, that type of news also set that back on the price insurance. At the beginning of March, you could buy calf coverage at $394. Well, now we're down to that $366 range. And if the message has got to be sent to say anything, it's that now is not the time to get complacent when we're in this type of environment. This tool is as important as we always say it is, but I would say it's even more important. And I just need to remind these producers that LPI is about the best defense you can have against a border closure threat. Price insurance, it's about protecting the down in the market.
Make sure everybody go to lpi.ca to find out more.
Choose Viatude fungicide and unleash best-in-class sclerotinia protection in canola and premium protection against white mold in soybeans. Viatude contains a powerful premix of Onmira Active and prothioconazole. This unique combo delivers high-performance disease control, crop safety, mix compatibility, resistance management, and advanced mobility for excellent coverage and superior plant protection. Choose Viatude fungicide for stronger, more vigorous crops.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Tuesday. Shaun Haney, your host. The answer to your above-ground nitrogen loss problem? Well, it's Anvil Nitrogen Stabilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. To learn how Anvil's dual active ingredients deliver extended protection, you can visit kochag.ca. Let's talk markets here this afternoon. And we're joined right now by Jon Driedger of LeftField Commodity Research, based out of Winnipeg, Manitoba. And he has a big smile on his face if you're watching on YouTube, because his Jets are up 1-0 in the series versus the Avalanche. How's it going, John?
Doing fine. Thanks, Shaun. Yourself?
Pretty good. Pretty good hockey game on Sunday night.
That was a little bit of a rodeo on Sunday night, so we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens here tonight. But hopefully they can clean a few things up. But it was exciting. It was exciting. But yeah, love the first round of the playoffs. It's best time of year.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of ties into seed going into the ground, of course, too, as things start to warm up and farmers are out in the field, and at least people can, if you are going to the game or you're around the rink, you can definitely actually have a beer outside, which is something that we can't do for most of the winter when it comes to Canada. Okay, John, let's talk about the markets. Overall, 100,000 foot. How would you describe where we are here right now, off of the highs of 2 years ago, but definitely not staring in the face some of the lows that we were dealing with pre-2020?
Yeah, no, that's very true, Sean. And in some ways, and to kind of overgeneralize, of course, every crop has its own story and so on. But I think by and large, for most of these markets, I could see us kind of going through a window here where we spend time trading in a range. We have been actually for a while, in a lot of cases for the last few months or maybe longer, depending on the market. Where as you mentioned, like well off of the highs of the previous couple of years. And I think, just to pause there for 1 second. I mean, I think sometimes we forget just how unusual all the different circumstances were that collided at the same time to cause prices to go to those incredible levels. War in Ukraine, drought in Western Canada, COVID, all those dynamics, all that stuff has worked itself out. Now we're kind of well off of those highs, but also, as much as sentiment feels negative in a lot of ways about the markets, we're still maintaining levels that are above what were would have been considered actually pretty good levels pre-2020. And so, depending again on the futures market, we maybe whereas previously we'd been bumping up against resistance levels, that's the new support. And so, in a lot of these cases, again, we've been trading in those ranges maybe for a little while, or setting up to kind of continue to trade in those ranges. And I think a case could be made that, barring, either perfect weather or multiple things stacking up one way or the other, we could spend some time drifting in a range that is, again, disappointing in the context of recent memory, and yet also from a longer term historical perspective, actually pretty good values. And we may just spend some time there, again, depending on how things shake out with weather and conditions and yields and so on.
Well, again, let's just use this as an example. September spring week. Okay. Right now we're around that 6.5. If you look at April of 2020, before the big run up, we're looking at a 5 spot. We're a $1.50 higher. Now, we also were at $14 at a very brief moment in 2022. So we're a lot closer to the bottom than we are the top. But still, if you look at the recent trade in a lot of these commodities, one, less volatility than there was during going through the pandemic. Or coming out of the pandemic, I should say, and more, we're definitely in a sideways trade. We're not in this conclusive like hockey stick up or the big drop down. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, I think that is fair, Sean, and I think you could make that case. I mean, looking at the charts, as you mentioned, you could look at whether you look at a long-term corn chart, you look at canola, those sorts of things. Again, similar-ish type of behavior, but I think also from a fundamental perspective in a lot of cases, and if we want to talk about something like canola, certainly the market is not anywhere as tight as it was, again, going back, the previous couple of years. And yet, we got all this crush capacity coming online, crush demand is increasing, stocks are not that large. Depending what yields look like this coming year, we're not going to have like a massive canola crop. And so that kind of helps lend itself to provide some support. And yet stocks are comfortable enough globally. In Canada, export demand has been soft to a lot of markets. That puts a ceiling. And so we kind of make time in a range. And in some of these markets, whether it's corn or some others, you get to the bottom of that range, all of a sudden, maybe farmer selling dries up. You unlock some fresh demand. You kind of rebound off the lows a little bit, and then you kind of, rally. And yet at a certain point, it kind of stalls out. Farmer selling picks up, maybe supplies are comfortable enough, that sort of thing. And it feels like there's sort of factors that sort of box us in either way from allowing us to kind of break too low or grab too much of a run. And so again, it just kind of lends itself to kind of moving in this range back and forth here. And as I mentioned, obviously we got the most important weather ahead of us, so all sorts of scenarios could play out. But calling, say, average-ish type of weather or that sort of thing, we could potentially see this kind of a scenario here for quite some time, quite possibly.
Would you call what we're experiencing here coming out of the first 4 months of the year? Have we established? And I hate to call this, but have we established a bottom? I've got my fingers crossed as I say that, everybody. I just want to let you know.
Yeah, no, I guess I'd put it this way, Shaun. Like, yeah, your resolve on that thesis is always tested when you start flirting with those support levels, and so I was a little reluctant, kind of pound my fist on the table, saying, yeah, absolutely, this is the bottom. But again, you look at something like, say, corn futures, sort of holding that 410-ish, for example, from a long-term chart perspective. I think that was, kind of pretty important, and you look back over a long period of time, and that has acted as a level of resistance. So that might naturally be a place where we held some support, and we did. And recently, soybean futures had held some support, soy oil, a couple of those markets. Again, if all of a sudden yields line up, we have a bumper crop. Those levels, of course, become vulnerable. But there seems to be, at least as of now, some support at those levels. Again, you start unlocking some demand. Maybe it starts getting a little quote unquote too cheap per se. Maybe they've sucked out a little bit too much weather premium given where we're at in the calendar. And so again, your resolve always gets tested when you start flirting with those levels. But so far they have held, and we would have a bias that they hold anyway, if you will. Again, just being an analyst, you're humble enough to know that things happen that you can't foresee with perfect clarity. But
Yeah, a fortune teller.
That's how I would view it.
Yeah, you're not a fortune teller.
No, we kind of think of ourselves, and Chuck always describes as well. We're more do reconnaissance rather than prediction per se. And that's maybe a more accurate way of putting it. We know what we don't know, and we try and be honest and acknowledge that, even as we kind of project out kind of what we think are some different scenarios and so on. It's all about probabilities, really.
Yeah. So if I think back to the last 6 months, okay. I would say the majority, high majority of the analysts that we've done interviews with, the strategy suggestion has been sell into the rallies. Is in your mind, is it still that kind of a market right now?
Yeah, honestly, I believe so, Shaun. It's one of those, and again, for sort of trading in a kind of a range, which again would be sort of our base scenario or our more likely scenario. We're reluctant to chase it lower when the market breaks. But at the same time, if someone's behind where they want to be at sales wise, old crop, new crop, whatever it is, use these rallies to do some catching up. The phrase I use is maybe a little bit of an itchy trigger finger. Do you need to, kind of sweep the bins and sell all of next year's crop because we tacked 15 cents in the market? No. Do you want to be taking advantage of rallies? Yeah, I think so. Because again, I think from a fundamental perspective, unless we start losing significant production and yield in some key growing areas, which could happen, but until that kind of starts to become a little more imminent rather than just a what if, I think these rallies are opportunities to do some catching up. Because at the end of the day, if we have, normal-ish type of a production scenario in a lot of these key regions, well, supplies are going to be comfortable enough that, well, those rallies probably are going to be pretty good opportunities we slide back down. So that's kind of our base scenario. And again, every crop sort of has its own nuances, but I think until Mother Nature tells us otherwise, I think that's the stance we sort of got to be working from.
Yeah, and a lot of the acres, the people that are listening to this show, spring's going to be off to an early, reasonably early start. So that works against you if you're trying to kill the crop. So yeah, there's a lot to be worked out on the production side. From the demand side, though, what are we seeing from a demand for commodities here at this time? As we're seeing a lot of areas start, their central banks starting to cut rates to spur their economies. Where's the demand side of this?
Yeah, that's always one to be honest. It's always really difficult on the demand side, and it's one that as we chat with clients, so something like supply, like you can touch it, you can measure it, you can feel it. The supply side,
you can see it out your window.
You can see it at your window, right? And of course, no one knows exactly what yield is going to be here going forward. We talk about all the unpredictability of weather and so on, but you can see it. The hard part about demand is, if so, demand is maybe sluggish, and does that mean that if prices pull back, the demand's going to come back? Is demand okay? It's slow today, but it's going to maybe show up a few months from now, or maybe it's gone altogether. And you never really know until well after the fact. Trade data comes out well after the fact, and so that's always really hard to predict. So I think, for example, with biofuels and those sorts of things, renewable diesel, and I mean we got some longer term tailwinds for things like oil seeds and vegetable oil, although not in a straight line. some other crops, it's I'm a little wary on the demand side, as you mentioned, Shaun. Central banks cutting because of slow economies, those sorts of things. I do wonder from a broader perspective, on the demand side, just all the inflation, high interest rates, long periods of time, is that whittling away demand in some of these countries, particularly maybe lower middle income countries? That's not always apparent on the surface, and so I'm a little cautious about that. China's always a wild card. And the other part too, on the demand side, if you think about it, say specifically from, say, Canada or the US, which is kind of where our prices are driven from. Let's just say Canada, for example, we've had a lot more competition, say, from in global durum markets of Turkey, or whether it's peas out of Russia, so it's not just global demand per se, but also competition from other countries as well. So we could think about global demand in aggregate. We can also think about export demand specifically, say, out of Canada, or, for example, soybeans out of the U.S. And as much as, Brazil's crop is smaller, South American production overall is going to be up, and so on and so forth. So there's kind of two prongs to that. So, I am wary on the demand side, and I say that not that it's eminently dark and demand's going to be terrible, but that is something that I wonder about, and certainly not complacent about. We're a little reluctant to be too aggressive on our export estimates or those sorts of things, again, depending on the crop. But that's something we got to be a little wary about, as much as we're walking into a time of year when everything is focusing on acres and yield, and appropriately so. But that demand side is really important, and it's maybe more uncertain than we've become accustomed to in the past.
Before we wrap up, Jon, I had a question from an audience member asking about the relationship or the correlation between the veg oil market and crude oil, as we start to hear more about some of the, the renewable diesels and the SAF, and obviously that demand is really yet to get fully to its possible, heights. What is that relationship at this point? As we've seen oil, obviously people talk, it's at, I think, just over 80, like about 83, 84, and people talk about 100. Is that a potential lift for the veg oil complex?
Yeah, I think that answer is, the short answer is I think the correlation has been tighter, as the renewable fuel and energy becomes a greater portion of demand. It's actually a topic we're going to be digging into a little bit deeper in some of our reports here in the next couple of months, because I think that relationship is changing over time. We want to tag some numerical values and do some studies and so on what that looks like. But the short answer is as energy becomes a larger portion of that demand component, I think that relationship is tighter. I think it is a little bit more complicated simply than just on any given day, say crude oil or diesel prices are up X and therefore veg oil will be up X. I think just as you think about volumes and various renewable fuel mandates and those sorts of things, that relationship is a little murkier or a little not quite so linear per se, if you will. But all else equal, if we see crude oil go racing higher, and I'm not an energy expert, but I think I'm a long-term energy bull or friendly to energy prices longer term. Certainly that's a tailwind. And so, but something that we're going to be doing a little bit more work on here going forward as well, because that's a really important question. And yeah.
Okay. Well, hey, Jon, really appreciate you joining us here today on RealAg Radio. Thanks so much.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Thanks, Shaun.
And go Jets, right?
And go Jets.
Okay, we'll be right back on RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM, right after this.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com, and what an opportunity! Oh my gosh! You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch Wheat Pete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify.
Before you get back in the field this year, spend some time with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Get all the information you need on hybrid selection, planting depth, crop inputs, and more from a wide range of industry experts. A massive library of video content is available on demand when you need it most. Spend your time outside of the field, inside the classroom, with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
You know, cattle markets are destined to rise and fall. Make sure you're protected from unexpected price drops with livestock price insurance. Price protection for calves is available now through to June 13th. For more information, visit lpi.ca. You know, we've had a lot of great shows in the past number of weeks. This has been a great run, and I just think the show keeps on getting better and better. That's my biased opinion, but I hope you agree. Your feedback has really been strong lately, and so trying to work in more of those comments and your thoughts into the show. So we're going to take some time here in this segment to do some of that. And wanted to start off with an email that I got here from Cornelia, and farms in Saskatchewan, and was listening to, I think it was the RealAg Issues panel going back a couple Fridays ago, and Lindsay was talking about how the sheep grazing industry, the solar grazing industry, is taken off in the U.S. relative to Canada. Canada, very static, the way I understand it. There's been some big stories in Bloomberg, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, talking about the growth of solar grazing. And sheep is one of the animals that is frequently used in that. So Cornelia's email says, I was listening to your podcast from last Friday and was quite interested by the solar grazing topic. While I know nothing about sheep as we run a grain farm here in Saskatchewan, I was thinking while listening to you that one of the reasons why there are less solar grazing projects in Canada versus the U.S. could be because of the lack of interest or push from power providers and governments to encourage solar projects. I don't know if this is the case in all provinces, but it sure feels that way in Saskatchewan. After electrifying most of our bin yard last year to move away from diesel generators, we set up a solar installation to power our entire farm. The process was not too bad from an administration point of view, but the pricing plans from SaskPower are surely not meant to encourage people to go this route. We still did it, as we saw it as an investment with an ROI of about 8 to 11 years, depending largely on the carbon tax debacle. Not sure how green grants work in the USA, but in Canada at the moment, they are quite insignificant for larger projects. There's a $5,000 cap on solar projects. The Agricultural Clean Technology Program money has been used up very quickly, and the program is not accepting new project money new projects since last summer. Not that we are looking for a handout from the government, but I think we would not be doing a good job as business managers if we were not looking at all aspects of a project. Also, talking with oil companies around here who still flare off lots of gas, I often ask why they don't set up turbines to produce power instead, and the response is very often that SaskPower does not encourage it, almost as if the power company was worried about losing some of their monopoly. Just a thought. Don't know if there's anything to it. Love listening to the show and the fact that I can do it whenever I can, listening to podcasts. Thanks to podcasts. So, well, yes, and Cornelia very much gets it. Yes, that's the beauty of podcasts, is that it's on demand. You listen to shows like this when you need to, if you can't catch it here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. So, interesting thoughts there. There's definitely a very higher level of aggression from a business perspective to grow the solar grazing industry in the U.S., as Lindsay has shared. So, Cornelia, thank you for sharing your thoughts. Friday's show, we talked a lot about the budget, and I was ranty last Friday, but pretty passionate about my perspective on some of the things that we heard. And I think not just blaming the government, but also we need to look at ourselves in the mirror as Canadians as well, in terms of some of the way that Canadians do business and our outlook on things. We got a couple comments on the show. And up first is a comment here. The whole idea is to get, so this is in regards to the capital gains taxes, okay? The whole idea is to get the land into the hands of organizations that will kick back cash to those in power. Farmers won't do that, and we notoriously are hard to corral, but if a few big landowners, companies own all the land, it's pretty easy to massage some kickbacks to the thieves who put the rules like this in place. Lifetime capital gains exemption will be the next thing to go. So that was one comment from on the YouTube channel, Old Engine Guy. Next, Trevor says, it's already difficult enough for younger generations to buy out older generations. Federal taxes are based on fair market value, not what they decide to sell it to you for. So the gifting component doesn't avoid the taxes. And it continues, the second big barrier is the annual minimum tax. Makes it nearly impossible to buy out older generation for over a period of time. The only solution at this point is to transfer on death, which means the older generation will be holding on much longer, and younger generations won't see the benefits of future growth unless farmers have the foresight to do a share value free. So, Trevor, thanks for your comments there as well. Yeah, I would say that there was a lot of interest in our discussion with Ryan Carrig with MNP about some of the changes to the tax regime in the budget and how it could or might impact farm succession. And farm succession is already a very difficult process for entrepreneurs to deal with. And there's a lot of barriers, okay? We could dig in later in the week if we have time in terms of some of those barriers. We did a study with Real Agri Studies about farm succession a year ago, and we talked about those barriers. But anything that creates larger barriers, higher barriers for entrepreneurs to handle business succession. And so there's differences here between somebody growing a business and selling it, doing an exit. And that's where the capital gains really is an issue. But there's also this challenge of how we're also, when you look at inside of a family, and if we talk about the value of family businesses and small business, being the engine of the economy, we need to do as much as we can to make sure those businesses keep running. And there is an opportunity for the next generation to participate in a very efficient kind of manner in that transfer. And, we already have a lot of things working against us when it comes to business succession. I just hope that the changes in the budget don't create higher barriers, higher bars. And that's what a lot of people are fearful of. And, Ryan Carrig was a great example. He's a tax accountant, so he knows much more about the tax code than I do or many of you as well. So we should take what he has to say with a lot of value. So, hey, keep that feedback coming. My email is shaney@realagriculture.com. You can find us across all the different social media platforms. We read a couple of YouTube messages here, so there's an example. Or you can always call the RealAg feedback line as well, 855-776-6147. Okay, let's take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about what's happening with the changes to temporary foreign workers with a representative from the Farms program. Find out how potentially these TFW changes could impact agriculture or not. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Dad, we missed the window for a PGR in our cereals.
Why didn't you add it to the herbicide?
What?
With Manipulator PGR, we can apply as early as one tiller. Just add it to the herbicide, no separate pass.
Don't miss out. Manipulator PGR is proven in wheat, durum, barley, and oats to shorten plants and even out the main stem and tillers. This results in reduced lodging risk, improved harvest efficiency, and increased yield. Talk to your crop protection retailer for more info and to confirm acceptable tank mixes.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by BASF and Syngenta Canada.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio, brought to you by the new Oxbow cereal broadleaf herbicide from New Farm. Oxbow is powered by Duplasm technology that is a workhorse on resistant kochia and other tough weeds in wheat and barley. Find out more by going to newfarm.ca. One of the topics we've been discussing here over the past number of weeks is what's coming in Canada in regards to changes around the temporary foreign worker program. There's a lot of focus on immigration and the amount of immigrants coming into Canada relative to trying to solve a housing crisis. Okay. And I don't know, I've been very critical of some of these changes. We've heard different perspectives on how much this is actually going to impact agriculture. The meat processing sector, very concerned. We heard from the CMC a couple weeks ago, but OFA saying that agriculture is going to have some exemptions. Lindsay Smith talked to Ken Forth of farms to get their perspective. Here's that conversation.
Joining me now to talk about, of course, some of the challenges of getting all the work that needs to happen on farms is Ken Forth. He's the president of FARMS, which is the Foreign Agricultural Resource Management Services. Ken, welcome here.
Hi, Lindsay. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. All right. So this is, of course, thanks for joining me on the show. It is a very busy time of year, of course, for your organization. For those who don't know FARMS, what is it that you do?
We do the administration and logistics for around over 20,000 workers in Ontario. We also bring in 3,000 or so workers for Atlantic Canada, and a few sporadic ones on the prairies.
Okay. So
we're probably moving on the three streams of agricultural workers. We're probably moving between 25 and 30,000 workers.
This is it's a huge number, and we have to wrap our hands around that at times on just how many people come to Canada to help our food system actually plant, care for, and harvest and move the fruits, the vegetables, all these things that have to happen in Canada. It is a huge and heavy lift. You mentioned the three streams. So where do these workers what are those three programs, those three streams that would bring workers into Canada each year?
The mainstream is a seasonal agriculture worker program. Been there since 1966. We've been administering that program in Ontario and Atlantic Canada since 1987. We were set up basically so we could streamline what a grower had to do to apply. He still has to apply to the Canadian government. Once it's approved, then we do all the work with the ministries of labor in the supply countries. We also own our own travel agency that moves the workers to Canada, hopefully on time for when the employer needs them. And we're moving workers from the first working day of January, basically, into Canada for greenhouses. And on the seasonal worker program, they can only work 8 months maximum. The average, though, is 24 weeks. And we're moving people for greenhouse in the first part of the year, and then later in the spring, we're moving them for pruning orchards and vineyards, and then we get into harvest of asparagus and that in May, and we're moving people April, May, and June is a heavy lift there, and then there's a heavier lift in the summer. Well, basically, the temporary worker program is the umbrella of everything. Amongst that is four streams for the one we don't do. But the one is the next one is the Ag Stream program. Works a lot like seasonal agriculture worker program, except you can keep people for up to 2 years on that program. Same people sometimes out of Mexico and the Caribbean and some other countries in Central America, but you can keep them for 2 years, and that addresses some people that need workers all year round. And the other program is called the low wage program. And the only people we move people for the low wage program is people like food processors who used to be in the SOP program for 50 years or more, and the government changed that and they put them in the low wage program. So we move their workers too to some of the multinational corporations in Ontario that do food processing.
So this year, and as you mentioned, we are in April, May, June, heavy lift. There's tons of work to do in the summer as well. How has this year gone as far as sourcing and moving workers into Canada to date?
So far, so good. I mean, the seasonal agriculture worker program has been around a long time. 85% of the people that come on that program are what they call in the named worker part of that, and that means the farmer asks for the same worker year after year after year. Some of them work 30, 40 years on the same farm. There's always a component, 15% or so of new people because people retire. But most of the time, it's return workers. I've got one guy on my farm. If he gets here in June, he'll be his 36th year.
Is that a common misconception of this program, that, this is very much, new people every year, or, that sort of thing? I think that some people don't recognize that this is, for a lot of these workers, this is something they come back to over and over.
Yeah, it's just like any other job. It gets in their blood. Like I've got one guy says, you like come back? He says, yeah, I'm here 6 months on my farm. He's here 6 months, and he goes home for 6 months. He loves that because what it does is it enhances everything he has at home, a better house and education for his children, which isn't necessarily available down there to people for free. At high school, you have to pay for in Jamaica. And so we've got lots of people on this, hundreds or thousands of people on the general program that have kids with university education now. And that's a big deal, considering most of them came from a very low education, some of them, in the early days.
Yeah, absolutely. So now there are, of course, this is a program where our temporary foreign worker programs in general have, often been challenged in some ways of either administration or, timeliness. COVID, of course, was a huge issue for bringing workers in and that. But we're also now seeing on the policy side from our federal government, certainly seeing more language around, in the name of trying to solve our housing crisis, discussions around, capping temporary resident numbers and these sorts of things. What right now impact is that having? What impact do you foresee this potentially having for your industry?
Well, so far it hasn't happened in agriculture. Now, you have to recognize there is 500 job categories in the temporary worker program. We only administer 3 of them in ag. The rest of them are every occupation almost you can name, food service and trucking and all that kind of stuff. It's all over the map. So there's a lot of different people come here that do different jobs other than agriculture. Everybody thinks it's agriculture because they drive by a farm, they see a dozen guys out in the field, and they say, hey, those are temporary workers. You never see them on the construction site. You never see them in the truck. But they're there and by the thousands. There's probably, other than agriculture, there's probably more than 150,000 other temporary workers that have zero to do with agriculture.
So now, certainly, for the agriculture industry, it's very important. Do you foresee some of these changes making it more difficult for Canadian farms and agribusinesses to access foreign labor force?
It hasn't. It has not yet. But as an example, some of these other parts of the business, other parts of the temporary worker program that have nothing to do with ag, they were allowed to have, through the pandemic, they were allowed to have 30% of their staff being temporary workers. And what they've done is they moved that 30% back to 20%. Agriculture has no such quota.
Okay. And have you received assurances that we won't see it, or not at this time?
When I heard the press conference, I sent an email to the senior bureaucrats, because agriculture wasn't mentioned when they came out with this press release and the subsequent press conference. And I just texted them and or emailed them and I said, where is agriculture? Mm-hmm. And I got a call back in 2 minutes and said, no. This is not about agriculture right now.
Okay.
And so right now, we're the main administrators of the program in Ontario and the country. Like there's 15,000 other workers come in across the country administered by other people, but we have not been told of any significant changes that are going to stop workers from coming.
Okay. So then,
as you may know, they changed the visa requirements for Mexico real quick. Like, here's what we're going to do as of today. And it did mess up things at the embassy for a week or two, and with the Mexican government and that. But we had a meeting of the minds through the administrators of the program, which are our federal government and Mexican government, and the people that do the logistics. Like one of them would be us, and we made it work. So we are still getting our workers out of Mexico, and it's not, it's as good as it's been. So it hasn't stopped it either.
So then, for the season, as you mentioned, worker flow is going well. Are there any foreseeable challenges that you're working to try and mitigate right now, or is it all systems go for the 2024 growing season?
So far, it's okay. Like when this thing came down about the visas from Mexico, my gosh, we were going to move 6,000 workers in the next 6 weeks. And it was a real deal that we had to get that fixed. And thankfully, my CEO in Toronto, she keeps calling people and saying, this has happened now and that's happened now, because they didn't really know what would happen when they did this. And we would report right away when there was a glitch, and pretty much they fixed the glitches. So we're away and running again. If I didn't have a general manager like I have that's just super, it may have been a little slower to do.
I think the experience of, a new policy or an announcement being done and not necessarily knowing all the consequences of it, it's very important to have somebody who's on the ball and listening for these things and makes that phone call. So, good to hear.
She was on the ball all right because she had to put people on airplanes.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know pretty fast when people don't get on them. So.
Yes. All right. Okay, Ken, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I do appreciate it. Good luck with the growing season and keep in touch.
When we come back on RealAg Radio, we're going to tackle the top ag news stories of the day. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147 on Sirius XM.
Does your N stabilizer contain an active ingredient load high enough to be agronomically effective? If not, it could be costing you time and money. If you're putting down a nitrogen stabilizer, put your trust in Koch Agronomic Services. Solutions like Super U, Tribune, and Anvil. Each delivers high active ingredient concentrations that low-rate products just can't match. Compare how imitator products stack up to agronomically effective solutions at defendyourn.ca.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomist, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. It's now time for the top ag news stories of the day. Want to use a PGR in your cereals but no time for a separate pass? Manipulator PGR can be applied as early as 1 tiller. Just add it to your herbicide to reduce lodging risk, increase harvest efficiency, and maximize yields. Talk to your retailer for more information and to confirm acceptable tank mixes. That is good. I love that wider window on manipulator. That is good information. Okay, let's get into what's going on in the world of agriculture in a broader sense. And, big news this morning, I think. Not what I expected to be the messaging or the conclusion of the Competition Bureau in regards to the Viterra and Bunge merger. So the Competition Bureau has concluded that the proposed acquisition of Viterra Limited by Bunge is likely to result in a substantial anti-competitive effects and a significant loss of rivalry between Viterra and Bunge in agricultural markets in Canada. The Bureau's concerns are outlined in a report submitted to the Minister of Transport. The report will inform Transport Canada's public interest review of the proposed transaction as it relates to national transportation. The Bureau determined that the transaction is likely to harm competition in markets for grain purchasing in Western Canada, as well as for the sale of canola oil in Eastern Canada. The Bureau also found that Bunge could materially influence the economic behavior of G3 Global Holdings, a major competitor to Viterra. As a minority shareholder of G3, Bunge has access to G3's confidential, competitively sensitive information. We heard from Canadian farmers on this topic. Real Agri Studies had surveyed farmers in Western Canada. I think it was like 70% of farmers felt this merger should not happen. When you talk to people in the grain sector, at least from my standpoint, everybody that I have talked to feels like there is not as much overlap as some have made this out to be, and that's even coming from some competitors. So what sort of impact does this have on this merger going forward? We can't jump to conclusions that they're not going to allow it, I don't think. There could be a shedding of assets and things like that. But the Competition Bureau coming out fairly strong against this merger acquisition happening as it sits here today. Climate AI launches AI-driven crop yield forecasts. Climate AI announced the public launch of Climate Lens Monitored Yield Outlook. This offers climate-driven yield forecasts for key crops, including corn, soybeans, wheat, sorghum, barley, canola, oats, hops, and potatoes, and insights into the climate's factors driving the variability. The product offers weekly yield outlooks from planting through harvest for the key production countries, states, and specific sourcing locations, surfacing the key climate risk factors contributing to yield with models uniquely calibrated by crop and region. And artificial intelligence is definitely more and more being weaved into the way that everyone's doing business in the world of agriculture. It's going to be fascinating to see where we are in 5 to 10 years on this topic. As the rainy season arrives at the Panama Canal as expected, there is optimism that the trade bottleneck will ease, coinciding with the busy period for shipping. Data from IMF Port Watch shows that the daily vessel crossings at the canal have increased, with the 7-day moving average reaching 25 last week, up from a low of about 21 in late January. However, this is still below the long-term average of about 35 crossings per day for the drought. To accommodate increased traffic, the Canal Authority announced plans to lift booking slots to 31 daily transits in the second half of May and to 32 starting in June. Continuing on the shipping front, Maersk has announced that its OC1 container line service can resume using the canal from May 10th, ending a workaround established in mid-January involving bypassing the canal using rail transit. A third temporary channel has been opened at the site of the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse. Of course, this is the bridge in Baltimore that was unfortunately, tragically hit by that ship, a cargo ship, a number of weeks ago. Commercial vessels can now use the Fort Carroll temporary alternate channel, boasting a controlling depth of 20 feet, a 300-foot horizontal clearance, and a vertical clearance of 135 feet. However, the temporary channel is distinct from the limited access channel expected to open by the end of April. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers anticipates opening the limited access channel to the Port of Baltimore by the end of April, supporting one-way traffic for barge container service and certain vessels transporting automobiles and farm equipment. Farm equipment being a major user of that shipping channel. So getting it fixed as promptly and as quickly as possible is very key. If we've been talking a lot about the economic concerns and what central banks around the world are doing, and of course, many in the G7 and beyond, central banks looking at ways to, or getting closer to either they have reduced their central bank rate or are about to. Canada, for example, it's looking like June. Meanwhile, in the U.S., it looks like potential where Chairman Powell at the Fed does nothing, maybe even increases rates once more, which would be a total reversal of where we thought we would be. But cutting rates doesn't seem to be really on the agenda at this point, based on some of the wording. A country dealing with a really interesting dynamic is Japan. We've seen the yen weaken significantly, and a lot of people wondering if there's going to be some sort of intervention from the government. The yen hit multi-year lows against the dollar and the euro on Tuesday, keeping investors on heightened intervention watch ahead of this week's Bank of Japan meeting. Japan's finance minister today said the Japanese government will take appropriate measures against excessive currency moves, while the Bank of Japan governor said it will raise short-term interest rates if inflation moves towards 2%. One of the things that I have been wondering, because Japan is a very important export market for both the U.S. and for Canada, and with that weakening yen, all of a sudden, goods priced in U.S. dollars, let's just use beef, for example, that beef just got a lot more expensive, right? And so how does this impact the amount of volume that Japan buys from North America when it comes to some of these products like wheat or like beef? The weaker that yen gets, the more expensive those products are to import. And does it impact a very, very important trade market for both Canada and the U.S.? If you have any feedback on today's show, well, of course, we'd love to hear from you. You can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the different social media platforms. And, hey, listen, you're also welcome to call the RealAg feedback line. It is super easy. Step up, everybody. I want to hear your voice on some of these issues that are impacting your farm or ranch in the U.S. or in Canada. That number is 855-776-6147. Okay, I got a ball game to go to. I got to make it over to the Blue Jays game. So we'll park it there for today's show, and we'll wrap up. And I want to thank everybody for getting real and getting connected here on RealAg Radio, and we'll talk again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio podcast, brought to you by Coragen Max Insecticide from FMC. When you need to protect your crops from damaging insects, Coragen Max Insecticide delivers fast, selective, extended control of grasshoppers, Bertha armyworms, diamondback moth, cutworms, and more. Ask your retailer today.